You study a language for years to actually speak it, but in classrooms across Pakistan, there is a recurring glitch. A student gets called on to answer a simple conversational question, and despite knowing the vocabulary, they completely freeze. This chart breaks down how time is spent in a typical classroom using the grammar translation method. Teachers talk and run grammar drills for 80% of the lesson. Students produce actual spoken language only 20% of the time. If the only metric that matters is a written test measuring structural syntax, this model is highly efficient. Students memorize the rules, fill in the blanks, and score high marks. But the moment those same high-scoring students step out of the exam hall and try to hold a spontaneous conversation, the structure collapses. They can conjugate a verb on paper, but they cannot ask for directions. A system built on grammar drills yields exactly what it designs: students who can explain the rules but cannot apply them. Improving language education requires looking past the curriculum. The real friction happens in the psychology of interaction, specifically how educators listen and respond to their students. The traditional approach offers a comfortable rhythm. Lessons follow a predictable pace, grading is objective, and the teacher maintains absolute, scripted control over the room. Researchers are now testing a different framework in these classrooms: Neuro-Linguistic Programming, specifically Meta-Model inquiries. As a structured communication toolkit, NLP provides teachers with specific questioning patterns to dismantle vague language and challenge the limiting beliefs that keep students silent. So educators face a strict trade-off. Do you maintain the safe, predictable order of grammar drills, or do you step into the demanding, highly spontaneous environment required to build actual fluency? This matrix weighs these approaches side by side, tracking primary focus, the teacher's role, and student output. Under the traditional method, the primary inputs are strict textbook rules, rote memorization, and immediate error correction. The teacher acts as the sole authority. The direct outcome is a student with strong syntax knowledge, but a high level of dependency. They wait for permission to speak and look to the teacher to validate every sentence. This constant correction builds what linguists call an affective filter. It is a psychological barrier, a fear of making mistakes ingrained by years of rote learning. When that filter is high, the brain blocks the ability to take risks. A student cannot generate natural, flowing conversation if they are internally translating and scanning every word for a potential penalty. Traditional methods successfully insulate students from making grammatical errors on paper, but by doing so, they actively insulate them from ever achieving conversational fluency. Looking at the NLP Meta-Model side of our matrix, the inputs change completely. Instead of scanning for grammatical errors, the teacher actively listens for linguistic distortions. For example, a student might use a universal quantifier, saying, "I always fail at grammar." An NLP-trained teacher intercepts that generalization, asking, "Always? Has there ever been a time you understood a rule?" Then there is the lost performative pattern. This happens when a speaker uses evaluative language without naming a source, like saying, "It's essential to study." Challenging this by asking, "According to whom?" forces the student to clarify their own thinking. This chart tracks the lost performative pattern. High frequency at scores 2 and 3 shows teachers rely on this for neutral feedback. While a few scored 0, most use this ambiguity. Consequently, students avoid language ownership, guessing who is actually making the judgment. This descriptive statistics table shows the application of various NLP Meta-Model language patterns. Scanning the mean statistic column reveals that educators apply these linguistic strategies moderately, but with significant variation across different techniques. Implementing these inquiries comes with a strict operational cost. It slows down the immediate pace of the lesson and requires the educator to think dynamically, reacting to what the student actually means, rather than what is written on a page. Applying the meta-model forces an evolution. The teacher stops reading from a script and becomes a linguistic facilitator, while the student's brain is forced to do the heavy lifting of clarifying their own meaning. Beyond structural linguistics, NLP employs psychological tools to build intense safety in the classroom, primarily through techniques like mirroring and matching. This involves a teacher consciously adopting the exact words and phrases a student uses. Validating their specific input lowers that affective filter and builds immediate rapport. This chart measures how frequently teachers use their students' own words during lessons. The towering bars for often and always prove that this mirroring strategy is a dominant method for keeping students engaged and connected. The framework also extends to nonverbal tracking. Teachers observe physical cues, specifically paying attention to learners' eye movements to gauge how they are processing information internally. This frequency graph confirms that modern practitioners rely heavily on visual observation. The overwhelming majority of teachers score often and always, using eye movements to guide their approach to individual learners. But the trade-off here is severe. Maintaining this level of hyper-vigilant emotional tracking and dynamic responsiveness is exhausting, and it becomes exponentially harder in large, overcrowded classrooms. NLP methods drastically increase a student's willingness to speak because they ensure the learner feels heard and psychologically safe. The cost of that safety is the continuous, high-level emotional bandwidth demanded of the teacher. Traditional methods are not inherently bad. They remain highly efficient tools if your objective is a very specific, short-term academic result. Take Profile 1, the exam prep coach. If you are bound by strict testing metrics, standardized curriculums, and inflexible pacing, the traditional method is exactly what you need to hit those targets. Now consider Profile 2, the conversational facilitator. If your mandate is to build autonomy, critical thinking, and verbal fluency, the NLP Meta-Model is mandatory for your classroom. Then there is Profile 3, the overwhelmed novice. The learning curve for NLP is steep and requires deliberate practice, but the long-term payoff in student engagement justifies the initial friction. If your goal is to build autonomous speakers, traditional grammar translation hits a hard ceiling. It prioritizes the test score over the ability to hold a conversation. Making the leap from a grammar lecturer to a linguistic facilitator can feel risky. Doing it without systemic training and support can easily lead to classroom chaos. That is where the ESL Academy by Abdul Ghafoor comes in, serving as a dedicated bridge for educators to master these precise communication tools. For educators and institutions ready to upgrade their teaching toolkit, you can reach out directly via WhatsApp at 0305-631-9464. Modernizing your classroom starts with how you listen. By changing that interaction, you give students the room they need to start speaking.